Good morning, Washington, D.C. And since we're online, parts far beyond. My name's Garland Nixon. We've got Regis Tremblay today. We've got Dan Lazare, and we have Alex Suarez, who just got back from Venezuela, coming out at 10:40. He's going to talk about what he found out in Venezuela. He's going to give us a different perspective. Let's talk. Good morning, one and all. Talking to you from the beautiful shores of the Chesapeake Bay here in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. And I have my dear friend once again from another beautiful place, the shores of beautiful Crimea on the Black Sea. Regis Tremblay. Regis, welcome back.
Hey, Garland, it's always good to be back with you.
So you're in Yalta, correct?
I'm in Yalta, and it's 5 o'clock here, and the sun is beating down on these windows on my balcony where I have my office. So I'm kind of look like I'm in the dark, but anyway, the voice will be okay, I think.
All is well, man, and we're great to hear. We're happy to hear from you. Well, one of the things that I've been talking about recently is this: the neocons always have a plan, and they tell us how things are going to work out. We'll invade a country, we'll be greeted with flowers, but we're greeted with machine guns generally. So the latest thing that we were told was that there would be massive sanctions against Russia, and two things would happen: the economy would crash, and the people of Russia would all turn on Putin. They would pounce upon him, toss him from office, and there would be, I guess, another a U.S. friendly guy would be in, and all would be well. So how's that business going against the people turning against Putin and pouncing on him and throwing him out of office?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, when these sanctions were announced, prices on everything went up 20 to 30% immediately. And everybody was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Well, I guess there was some genius behind what the Russian Federation did. And Putin doesn't deserve all the credit, by the way. These sanctions have actually backfired. On February 24th, Putin's approval rating was around 65%. Yesterday, it was reported that it's up above 80%. You mentioned 83 percentile. That's where it's pegged right now. The other thing that's incredible is the ruble took a dive immediately. And just yesterday, I heard that the ruble was the best performing currency in the world for the month of March. It is now rebounded, and it's been the highest it's been in a very long time. So people are happy here. People are happy with Putin. There isn't any question about it. And the people not only are happy about what's happening with the economy, the people are happy about the progress that the Russian military has been making in the Ukraine.
I've got I've got an article right here from it's on MSN.com. It's from Bloomberg News. Bloomberg News, some 83% approved of Putin's actions as president in March 24 through 30 survey, an increase of 12 percentage points on the previous month and the highest since 2017, based on the Levada Center report. So the proportion agreeing the country is heading in the right direction jumped 17 percentage points to 69%, the highest Levada began recording since responses in 1996. Here's what's interesting. It is like looking in a mirror with the U.S. And what I mean is the mirror gives you the opposite view. A recent survey in the U.S. said 71% of Americans believe that the United States is heading in the wrong direction, while 70% of Russians believe that Russia is heading in the wrong direction. What do you think about that?
70% of Russians think Russia is heading in the
right direction. The right direction.
I would agree. I would agree with that in Russia. I only hear from friends and lots of other people that are in the United States how bad things are going and what a poor job Joe Biden is doing. His approval ratings are like in the 40th percentile. But things here in Russia, People are living life like they have. They've gotten over the shock of the intervention in the Ukraine, pretty much. Here in Crimea, not so much.
Right.
As I've mentioned to you before, they got friends and relatives on the other side that are dying, that are missing. They don't know what's going on. But in terms of life here, the economy, the mood, it's totally going up. And I've been here now for 2 years, coming here since 2016, and I can't tell you the progress that's been made in these last 7 or 8 years. It's unbelievable.
How do how did the people there, view what's happening, the war, the progress in the war, the support for the war in Ukraine? Because here, it's put forth here like Putin just woke up one day as an individual, and he's the complete dictator. He rules everything. He's the worst dictator ever. But he just woke up one day and he made the decision, apart from anybody else, to do this, and that everybody else is just following his lead, that they don't understand the dynamics of it. So why do you think there's such support for the military operation in Ukraine throughout Russia?
Well, first of all, Putin is the furthest thing from a dictator, a tyrant. People just don't understand the dynamics of Russia, Russian culture, Russian history, and the Russian government. Putin has had to walk a fine line, a balancing act between oligarchs, very powerful oligarchs, who in the 1990s, during the Yeltsin years, took over many of Russia's assets. They became billionaires overnight. On the other, and these people are Western-leaning capitalist kind of people, globalists. On the other side, there are globalists, there are oligarchs, who are incredibly wealthy, have a tremendous influence on Russia, Russian domestic and foreign policy. And then Putin has his parliament, his Duma, upper chamber and lower chamber, that is very powerful. They pass the laws. They don't have to, they just don't do what Putin says. And it's a huge mistake for anybody in the United States or in the EU to think that Putin cooked up all of this stuff in terms of the war on his own. He didn't. He's not a military mind. He's got a military apparatus that is probably now the best in the world. And he has other advisors, the national security state. These people are the ones that put this plan together. Putin simply announced it. He doesn't make these decisions unilaterally. And anybody that thinks that just doesn't have a clue how things work here in Russia.
I wanted to ask you something, because a lot of my contacts in Russia say that, in fact, Putin is one of the more moderates, that there was a lot of hardliners in Russia who have been pressuring him for years, who were basically angry at him, saying, you should act on Ukraine sooner. What are you waiting for? That he's one of the ones that was pulling the reins back, so that these people are like, Putin is the guy, he's the hardliner, etc., that he was actually one of the moderate voices in the overall bureaucratic team and process in Russia.
Yeah, you're right. You're right on 100%. People have accused him, many, of not having acted in 2014 during the coup in the Maidan in Kiev. His popularity went down tremendously. When he took Crimea back into the Russian Federation, his popularity went back up again. So Putin, he's merely the face of the operation. He's not a puppet by any means. I'll tell you what Putin is. He's a fierce Russian patriotic nationalist. Mm-hmm. He longs for the Soviet Union that he grew up in. He does not want to recreate the Soviet Union. That would be political, economic suicide for Russia to do that. And I'll tell you something else about Putin that I have learned from several people who have studied him and know him well. First and foremost, Putin is a KGB analyst. He's not an assassin. He was not an operative. He was a KGB analyst living in Berlin for several years.
He's actually a lawyer, isn't he?
He's actually a lawyer and specialized in international law. So he's a very, very bright guy. But he thinks like a KGB analyst. He's very much aware of the world. on top of being this analyst and how he analyzes everything, he grew up in the streets of St. Petersburg, very tough. And he got in many fights when he was a kid. And now he's a black belt in judo. And he really believes, okay, that you do not strike back at your enemy's strength. You strike at your enemy's weakness. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And so when people think about Putin and try to figure out who he is, they should think KGB analyst, not an assassin, analyst, not an operative. They should think a patriotic Russian. They should think a black belt in judo. And they should think of an incredible diplomatic spokesperson, leader on the world stage. There are none who can compare to him right now. Regardless of whether you think he's a Hitler or whatever, he commands such respect throughout the world, except in the United States and Europe and probably Japan and South Korea. Everywhere else.
Sorry about that. Let me ask you about the and once again, we're talking with Regis Tremblay. He's in Crimea. He's in the Crimean Peninsula, which borders Ukraine, and it is in fact a part of Russia. Your thoughts on the gas for rubles stuff going on? I find that interesting. And again, you know what else? Let me add this. As a person who studies self-defense and martial arts, what are you going to strike? You're going to strike the eyes. You're going to strike the throat. You're going to strike the groin. You're going to strike the weak areas, right? Germany, EU, those are weak areas. I feel like they're not doing broad sanctions in Russia. They're making moves against the areas of weakness. That is a traditional martial arts attack. Your thought on gas for rubles?
You know, what the United States and Europe have done with these sanctions on Russia, thinking they could tank the economy, they could take it down and thereby overthrow Putin. They thought they would turn the people against him. You know, when Putin last week said that, okay, beginning April 1st, yesterday, you will only buy Russian gas and oil, and it's going to be other products like grain and petroleum and nickel and silver, all things that the Western world needs. He said, you're going to pay in rubles. And like really idiots, schoolboy, I mean, juvenile reaction, we're not going to pay. Really? How are you going to live without Russia's oil and gas? They can't do it. Germany, for one, will collapse, not only as an economy, but as a country. The same thing is going to happen in France, in Italy, and everywhere else, in Austria, where they say, we're not going to pay. Really? Let's see what happens when he turns the gas off. And talk about a weakness, Garland. That's the weakness for the West. The United States, I forget how many millions of barrels of Russian gas a day it imports. And I just read that the United States Treasury is lifting some of the sanctions on the import of Russian gas.
Yeah.
I mean,
at the same time, they're trying to tell Europe to stop. And here's the reality. They can't. It's not even an option. Whatever Russia tells them they have to do, not only is it not an option, it's not an option for many, many, many years to come. If they wanted to go to U.S. liquefied natural gas, they would have to build the ports and facilities, which would take 5 to 10 years, and then they'd have to pay 5 to 10 times as much. What would be the point? Because their industries would still go out of business. So that's not an option right now. It's a connection. Here's the thing about it. It's a connection that actually benefits Europe and benefits Russia. So what the U.S. is saying is stop doing something that benefits your industries and your people.
Yeah. Well, the United States is an occupying force. Let's face it. I don't know. They've got tens of thousands of troops in Germany, thousands and thousands of troops scattered all over Europe with bases and missiles and hardware stored during these annual war games in the former Soviet republics right up on Russia's borders. It's an occupation. They have a stranglehold on Europe, on the European leaders, that political class, not the people. The people know they're getting screwed. They know they're getting screwed big time because they can't afford the gas. They're losing their jobs because the factories are shutting down or cutting back. They can't afford the food. This is right across Europe. And you know what? From what I hear, the same pain is now being felt in the United States at the pump and in the grocery store.
I was looking online. Sunflower oil in Germany was about $10 for like a gallon. Now it's $55 a gallon. So I tell you what, I think that the people of Europe are going to start asking their leaders some really hard questions, saying, how did we get here? Was it worth it? What is it that Russia wanted to prevent this war? What is it that Russia wants to end this? Is it worth it? Should we strike a deal with Russia? Your thoughts?
Yeah. Most of the people, I think, know what's going on. Most of the people, if they were given a chance to speak or to even to vote out that European Parliament, which is not elected, that's what they would do. People want peace. They want harmony. They want prosperity. They want jobs. They want security. That's all Russia's ever been asking for. But it's the United States that has had this stranglehold and has polluted the entire discourse of a unification of Europe. That's just where it's at.
What do you think? What's going on? I find it interesting that Sergei Lavrov's doing a lot of traveling around. He's in India. He's in China. What do you think about what's happening with Russia's allies and things that are happening as far as dealing with this kind of economic blockade that the U.S. is trying to attempt?
Well, if anybody could read the news from other places, India, Pakistan, China, Iran, Syria, Venezuela have all, and other countries have banded together and said, we are not going to impose sanctions on Russia. They're already trading in their own currencies. And the statements that Lavrov has been making with his Chinese counterparts, his Indian counterparts, his Pakistani counterparts, is we are moving on to a fairer world order without the United States. Talk about a bomb. Talk about the mother of all bombs. This was a clear and emphatic message to the United States that your game is over. We're not playing with you anymore.
It appears to me that there's a lot of that one of the things that's happening is there's trading going on in individual countries' currencies, and they're pushing back against the U.S. dollar as the ruler. Well, let me ask you about this. We got a few minutes left. The situation on the ground in Ukraine, as you understand it, we know that according to the U.S. media, Russia's, the Azov battalion has Moscow surrounded, and the Russians are losing 8 million people an hour. They've been devastated and taken out. One Ukrainian soldier has taken out a brigade of Russians single-handedly with just a knife. But as you understand it, what's going on in Ukraine on the ground?
Okay, I listened to three sources. I listened to Russian Ministry of Defense, and I look at their daily reports, and their daily reports should be paid attention to, especially by anybody in the United States who is a military analyst, operative kind of person. That's where the facts are. And the facts are that the Russian military completed phase 1 of the demilitarization. Phase 2 is not the denazification, not yet. Phase 2 is to regroup and redeploy from the west towards the Donbas republics, and they will annihilate some 20 or 30,000 troops that are still there, still fighting, still shelling and killing the people in Donbas. They will be annihilated, I'm telling you, within next month. There's no doubt about it. Once they are gone, Ukraine has no operative forces, fighting forces that are able to communicate or remobilize, reposition. And that's when the encirclement, the tightening of the noose around Kiev will continue. I'm predicting you will not see a bombing and a shelling of Kiev. The intent is the cauldron that is going to force the government to collapse. That's what Russia has wanted, one of its major goals. And it'll come out of that will be a neutral Ukraine with no ties to NATO, no ties to the European Union. So that's how I think. The other sources that I look at are two friends of mine, a Dutch woman who's just come back from Ukraine. I'll interview her in about an hour, and an American whom I know, Patrick Lancaster. People should search him. He's got millions of views. He has been on the ground in and around Mariupol for the last couple of weeks. He's got amazing stories to tell. You don't want to listen to any of the propaganda coming from the West. Patrick Lancaster, on the ground with his own videos, is showing people the truth about what's been happening.
Yeah, I suspect that as much as you, the main part of the biggest, largest contingent of the Ukrainian military, and I've heard any numbers ranging anywhere from 20 to 80,000. I'm sure you've heard those numbers. Who knows what it really is, but we've heard all kinds of numbers. Is near the Donbass. That what I've heard is the Russians have them encircled. They will give them the option of either laying down their arms and leaving or being annihilated. And that at that point, the Ukraine won't, the Ukrainian, what's left of the Ukrainian government will not have an operational army. For all intents and purposes, the war is over. In some cities, there will be various contingents of military, but as an army itself, they won't have an operational army, which means they can't get troops around, move tanks and hardware around, move any troop that's in place can't be reinforced with food, with water, with fuel. And actually, at that point, it's just a matter of either they give up or they just bit by slowly but surely, the time ticks away and they run out of fuel and food, etc.
You're 100% on target. Nothing else to add to that, Garland.
Yeah. And what your thoughts on, I've been reading that the U.S. The U.S. State Department has been going around kind of bullying people, telling various countries that they have to go along with the U.S. or else, and that they've been trying to bully India and various countries, and that basically it isn't working. Why do you think it is, in the face of so much U.S. power and military and economic power, that countries like India and Pakistan and countries that aren't really big, powerful countries are finally saying to the U.S., no, we're not going to do what you want us to do?
I think because, number one, they've rejected this hegemon, the United States empire. They've rejected the violence that it has been doing all over the world, the killing of people in their part of the world, in Afghanistan, for example, or the Middle East, which is not very far. They don't want any part of that. They are looking for peace, and they are looking for prosperity. They are looking for cooperation. And the only countries that are offering them that are Russia and China. They see a new world order emerging, and they want to be part of it. I think it's as simple as that.
Oh, okay. Let's stay on. I've got to do a little something while we're talking, but if you could tell us how things are going there as far as the situation on the on the day-to-day life in the Crimea area, what things are looking like as far as what's available to purchase and what's available for you know what I mean? How the I'm getting at.
I have to laugh a little bit. I'm telling you, it is not only normal, people living normal lives, doing the things they have always done, but things are getting better here in every sense. The hope for the economy is rising. The hope for development is rising. It's unbelievable what's happening here. The money that's coming not only from the Kremlin, but from other sources to develop Crimea, because they see it as this is going to be the next gold boom, gold rush. And so things here are pretty good. A lot of people don't have the kind of paying jobs that they'd like, but people are getting by. I can't tell you that it's doom and gloom. It's certainly not like anything that's happening in the United States right now.
Well, I hope things work out like that for us, because man, the prices are going up and people are really complaining. I think it's going to be a long, hot summer in Washington. I mean, in the U.S., and I think that people are going to really, as I said about the EU, people are going to ask themselves some really hard questions, ask our leaders some really hard questions. And I don't think they're going to have very good answers for them. Thanks a lot, Regis. And, the best of the, all the best to you. Keep up the good work. And everybody, make sure you follow Regis on his YouTube channel, Regis Tremblay. Thanks a lot. What's the name of your channel, Regis?
Regis Tremblay, or Trem Reggie on YouTube. It'll be easy to find.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right, coming up next, we got the one and only Dan Lazare from New York City. Oh my gosh, the belly of the international monetary system, or would it be London? I'm not sure. I guess the international monetary system has two big bellies, and Dan's in one of them. How's it going, Dan?
Just great, Garland. How are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's start with the big thing today, Dan. I mean, the big news this week was, of course, the rubles for gas. There was a lot of discussion. Putin talks to Olaf Scholz. Olaf Scholz says, well, we're going to have some time. Putin says, yeah, you got 1 day. And when we look at it, and we're still trying to figure out, it appears that there's going to be rubles purchased with euros, traded with rubles. And so it's still a little confusing. I don't think it's as hardline as it initially appeared to be. But your thoughts on this whole mess that was the gas for rubles this week?
Well, I follow Alexander Mercours's commentaries very, very closely. I mean, I don't share his politics, which I think are right of center, but I think he's a very smart observer. And he was expressing the same confusion that I express. I mean, I just don't understand what the nature of the European hysteria is, or on one hand, or the miracles that people expect this, ruble conversion to accomplish. I mean, all it involves is that the country or the companies which wish to purchase Russian gas are required to open an account in the Gazprom bank, pay their euros into that account, which are then, immediately and automatically transferred into rubles. But that's the way any international transaction works. I mean, if I purchase a book from Amazon UK, I pay in dollars, and the dollars are then transferred to Amazon UK, which immediately transfers them into British pounds. So it's quite ordinary. In this day of computers, entirely frictionless. You don't have to go to an exchange window and hand over your paper money and then have someone count out your change in pounds. So it's all quite frictionless, and I just don't understand either the hysteria on the European part or the hopes for some kind of economic miracle to result that I hear from certain supporters of the Russians. So I'm no help there for it all.
Well, no, those are, I think you laid it out very, very clearly. Everything from the confusion of those of us who are looking at it, and some people expected a more dramatic move, and those who thought that it was going to have some major change in how currencies were exchanged between the two countries. Now, a couple of things if we look at it from a strategic perspective. Number one, it did create a big stir. It was a huge, gigantic splash. If you wanted to argue from a PR or information war perspective, it was a huge splash. But I don't, to be quite frank, I don't think the Russians do information war particularly well, and I don't think they focus on it particularly that much. But could it be it's kind of an opening salvo? Because after that, I heard Dmitry Medvedev, whatever, say that we may stop selling agricultural products to unfriendly nations, period. The Russians have now announced they're not selling any gas to the UK at any price. They announced that recently. So do you think it was kind of an opening salvo in that the US and the EU came out with all of their sanctions and they emptied their chamber, and the Russians are now saying, we're going to start creeping out stuff a little bit at a time, et cetera, et cetera. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's an economic war going on, and it's not all one way. I think the Russians have a lot of feathers in their quiver, and they have, and they're going to start, and they're firing them off against these hostile nations, and those include energy embargoes and grain embargoes, and those are very powerful weapons. So we'll see what happens. I think the bottom line is that I hold NATO responsible for creating this entire disaster in the first place. I think that Putin's role was really ancillary. But what NATO has done is open up the gates of hell in economic terms. They are unleashing an economic catastrophe. It's causing hunger across broad sections of the third world, fueling inflation in the U.S. and in Europe, which will lead inevitably to a central bank crackdown, which will lead in turn to recession. And this, I think these tendencies were already in place, but I think the breakdown in Ukraine, the onset of war has accelerated them tremendously.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Russia's actually their arsenal of economic weapons is growing, as when you look at Russia, Belarus, and now Russia at minimum is going to have a Russian friendly government in most of Ukraine. I mean, you're looking like what? 38% of the world's wheat and all these agricultural products. It's going to be very, very powerful. But let me ask you this. We're moving to something else. And that is, recently we've seen the Secretary of the U.S. State Department going around the world threatening India. You better stop being friends with Russia. Threatening Pakistan. It's really odd to me. I mean, maybe that's the night, right? It's consistent with them, but that the only thing they know how to do is threaten people. There's apparently threats of a coup in Pakistan, etc. What are your thoughts about how this Blinken State Department is reacting to, I'll put it like this, Russia's move on one side to consolidate or to bring together its world allies, to strengthen its alliance with other countries to make it stronger for this economic war. And on the other hand, the U.S. and the State Department under Blinken going into full threat mafia mode. I mean, they're going around like the mafia threatening people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general trend in terms of U.S. power since 2008, 2009, the financial meltdown, has been downward. And I think that interestingly enough, as real power goes down, bluster goes up. I mean, anyone who watched Biden's speech in Warsaw last weekend, I mean, the call for regime change was ridiculous, and of course, it was a call for regime change, and no amount of verbal fog emanating out of the White House can change that fact. Number one, but number two, I mean, Putin's, his rhetoric was ridiculous. He conflated today's Russia with the old Soviet Union, which makes no sense at all. And just the very fact that he was like shouting and gesticulating and trying to look like a tough guy, I mean, I think that it was clearly a sign of overcompensation. And what he really did was put on a display of weakness and incompetence, coupled with really kind of unhinged warmongering. So I think the world looks at that, and the signal that they get is that is that America is doing very badly. It's losing control. Doesn't know what kind of mess it's stepped into, and after years, decades of just maddening American hypocrisy, in which there's one rule for America and another rule for the Europeans, and a third rule for the third world, which winds up with the really crummy end of the stick. I mean, people are really fed up, and so people, so the world finds itself sympathetic to Russia. And when I say the world, what I mean is in South Asia, China, large swaths of Latin America and Africa. I mean, these people are so hostile to America, and they sense weakness on America's part, and therefore they can't help but feel sympathy for Russia. Now, please, I'm not saying this is not an endorsement of
Right, certainly.
Putin's war, but I'm just explaining why opinion in these countries is so anti-American and so just innately sympathetic to Russia.
I also think it's centuries of colonialism from the Eastern European countries and from, in more recent centuries, from the United States empire. I think that countries that have been, enslaved and I mean massacred and you name it for centuries, literally, are looking at someone punching back at the United States. And I've heard this from people and from recently from friends of mine who have traveled in what we would consider, they used to say third world, now they say developing nations. Friends who have traveled recently said I've gone out to the villages and talked to people who would be considered peasants, and they are acutely aware of what's going on. And they're saying they are happy to see someone punching back at the monster. And I'd say the monster of the US, this big, gigantic beast that no one would dare, raise a fist at. That there's that anti-colonialist perspective that's centuries old.
I totally agree. I mean that's certainly the case in Latin America. I mean, my God, just like they have suffered under a 2-century American dictatorship due to the Monroe Doctrine, and American behavior has been outrageous, and it's gotten more outrageous, more hypocritical, more pious, in the way it always sort of quotes democratic platitudes, and more, double dealing. But that's true in Africa. I mean, it's true in India. But India also, of course, had traditionally friendly relations with Russia for a variety of reasons, but one of which was the historic U.S. tilt towards Afghanistan, and of course China. So all these countries have a reason to resent Europe and the U.S. and it's showing. And of course the disparate treatment of refugees. I mean that's obvious. I mean, the fact that black and brown people, are turned away at the border, or are just dispersed by border cops on horseback, treated just like animals. Then these people are fleeing U.S. war, the U.S. war on drugs, which has made their life a hell, and then the heroes welcome that is extended to Ukrainian refugees, and of course you have American reporters babbling, saying like, oh well, these people are different because they've got blonde hair and blue eyes, and that actually is a direct quote, as you know.
Yes.
And so this message gets through. I mean, this is one of the great things about living in a world of instant communications. I mean, these images, penetrate immediately to the farthest reaches of Latin America, of sub-Saharan Africa, of South Asia, etc. It's wonderful. And so, so you really can't hide this monumental hypocrisy on America's part.
Let me ask you about the media. I do a show in Washington, D.C. It's a 50,000 watt FM station. And when Ukraine this thing first started, right? And my position is clear. It is what it is. And I'd get beat over the head. I had people call me, "You've just lost a listener," and give me, a hard time. That's changing. I did a show last night and it was a major reversal. People are asking questions. And I think part of it is so many people are going to alternative media. But let me give you this. Jen Psaki is now leaving the White House spokesperson to work for MSNBC. In my opinion, she's going to be doing the same job. She's just getting a bigger paycheck from someone. But weapons of mass destruction was one thing. I believe that as time goes on into the summer, when people start asking greater questions, suffering greater pain, when they're going to look at Western media once again and say, wait a minute, that more people are going to alternative media, that people at some point are going to realize that things aren't quite as had been proposed to them. What are your thoughts about this, about where the Western media is, and whether maybe I'm wrong? Your thoughts on whether or not there'll be questions?
No, I think you're completely correct. I mean, questions by themselves can lead to good or bad answers. But yes,
Right.
you're completely correct. I mean, I mean, now there is complete shock and horror over what Russia, set off with its invasion, and people are very upset. And there's an instinctive rallying around the flag and rallying around the Ukraine. But gas prices will keep climbing, inflation will keep climbing, recession will kick in, and Americans will start feeling the pain, and then they will start asking the tough questions, which should have been asked immediately, and the questions which the mainstream press refuses to consider. I mean, I've never seen more one-sided war propaganda. It's even worse than it was in 2002 during the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. Now, I mean, people like Tucker Carlson, I mean, their ratings are rising. The Republican Party in general seems to be adopting a soft view of the war. This is very much a Democratic Party war, and I think that many people are expecting a wipeout, a Democratic Party wipeout in November, which will amount to a referendum on the war. And so I think that that public support is not nearly as strong as the mainstream press wants us to think, and I can only believe that it'll grow less strong in the coming months as the economic pain starts to be felt.
Yeah, and I'll end up by saying this, and get one quick question before we go to my dear friend Alex next, and that is, I was looking online, and this was, I forgot what it was. This was like a European paper, and sunflower oil had been $10 a gallon. It's now $55 per gallon. I mean, the U.S. is one thing. I think that the yellow vest was nothing. I think that the European continent is going to explode with fury. I also saw in Italy that there were trade unions now that are refusing, if Italy or Greece, that are refusing to load weapons to go to Ukraine. I think the pain is going to be much more extreme in economic pain is going to be much more extreme in the EU, and that it's going to explode with the fury of 1,000 suns from people who are going to get hit with a recession that they haven't seen in many years.
Well, at least a dozen sons would be great. But yeah. No, and I think that the anger in the EU, the anger in the American heartland, where people are dependent on gasoline, and also, but let's not forget. I mean, people are starving to death.
Yes.
In Africa, and inflation is rising very strongly. Food prices, as you point out, are just going through the roof, and that leads to political instability. The Arab Spring was kicked off by a sharp rise in food prices, just as the French Revolution was in 1789. I think we will see that effect repeating itself as prices continue going up, and that will lead to political instability, which will lead to regime change, which will lead to refugees, which will lead to more political disorder in the advanced world. So as I said before, the U.S. has really opened up the gates of hell
on
due
itself,
to its massive mishandling of this problem.
Well, and I'll leave with this. I always say when we talk about the French Revolution, when people run out of bread, it's off with the leader's head. We'll say maybe that's metaphorically this time, possibly. Dan Lazare, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate it, man. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
All righty. All right. And next, oh my gosh, we got Alex Suarez. Alex has been to Venezuela recently. Venezuela has been in the news because for some reason, the Biden administration, Alex, they wanted oil, but they didn't go to the president of Venezuela, according to them, Juan Guaido. They decided to go to Nicolas Maduro. Let's talk about Venezuela. Alex Suarez, let's start. I understand you do some podcasts and some things. Tell people who is Alex Suarez and where they can find you.
Sure. I used to have a podcast called Vanguard Youth Radio. It's been inactive. I'm now co-hosting the Eclectic Radical Show that's on YouTube. I was taken off Facebook a couple years ago, but I've been building a following on Twitter. So you see my Twitter handle here, Al R Suarez. I'm also known as Alex Suarez. But yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned Italy at one point, because I was remembering in 2019, the independent Italian prime minister actually was one of the only European countries to not recognize Juan Guaido. So they've taken a more independent position resisting U.S. pressures. So I'm not surprised that they could be taking a more independent position when it comes to what's going on with Russia.
Yeah, and so let me ask you this. You have been to Venezuela recently, and I've been myself, traveled all over Venezuela, beautiful country, wonderful people. I absolutely love it. So let's start with this. One of the myths, and I know it's a myth because I've been there, is Nicolas Maduro is a dictator and he's dictating over the people, and the people there don't like him. Why? They really want Juan Guaido. Talk to us about the realities on the ground about the Nicolas Maduro, the Maduro government, what the people in Venezuela want economically. I mean, politically.
Sure. And just in case it was my job when I was there late last year for the first time as a regional election observer, to see their democratic process. And I want to laugh when people call him a dictator. There was 24 regions and 20 of them went to the United Socialist Party, which is Maduro's party. So that's ridiculous. There was 500 international observers from all over the world that took part. And actually, this is the first time in a while the EU took part, because the EU said they didn't want to observe because some opposition parties boycotted it. This time, all opposition parties took part. And it's also important to understand that about a year and a half ago, Juan Guaido lost his position as head of his political party. His political party is called Voluntad Popular, which is a small extreme right party. And the name is quite ironic because that means popular will. But Parra took over his party about a year and a half ago. So he was thrown out of his own party. He's no longer a part of the National Assembly. So it's not even a question of does he head the National Assembly. He's not in the Assembly. He's been disgraced even within his own party because he went too far. So even people in the opposition hate Juan Guaido. Wherever he goes, he has to be heavily guarded because people want to stone him. They consider him a traitor. These are not just Chavistas. Regular Venezuelans hate Guaido. They consider him a traitor, and justifiably so. He's not only advocated for regime change, he's been a strong advocate up till very recently, consistently has been openly advocating for sanctions. This is despite the fact that a couple of years ago, the UN determined that at least 100,000 Venezuelan civilians were killed by U.S. sanctions, which of course has increased under Biden, who has continued the Trump sanctions. So this is a country of only 28 million people.
Right.
A lot of people have had to flee, but some of those people that fled were not politically persecuted people. I mean, there is no persecution in Venezuela. As a matter of fact, most of the judges in Venezuela, just like most of the media, is controlled by the opposition. But a lot of people that fled or left Venezuela, some of them are even Chavistas themselves. They've gone to Peru, they've gone to Miami, etc. Those people are leaving for economic reasons, and they understand. They're sophisticated enough to know, as are the majority of the Venezuelan people, that the primary cause of the economic grief that they've gone through are the sanctions themselves. And we see now with Russia, we saw with 60 years of a U.S. imposed embargo on Cuba, that all the sanctions do is have the people rally around their leader.
Alex, let me ask you this. The last time I was in Venezuela, I remember seeing anyone who travels of South America knows lots of art, lots of beautiful murals all over the place. There were murals of Venezuela and Iran, and that I saw a number of them, and they were building this big grocery store. I think it was an Iranian grocery store. And when I was there a couple of years ago, and it was really, really bad there. I mean, people had nothing. The gas stations were closed. There were a few people on motorbikes. It was terrible. I understand that with the help of some of their international friends, Iran, Russia, China, even Turkey to some extent, that things are coming back quite well, and despite the sanctions in Venezuela. So you've been there recently. Are things improving? What do you see?
Yes, they're improving tremendously. I toured different parts of Venezuela, saw their factories. A lot of those factories, for example, their finance department are run by women. When they used to be controlled by U.S. corporations, they were very limited in how many women would be hired. but because of the feminists in the socialist government, they were able to hire a number of women in these factories. And so these factories are making things like toilet paper, which they couldn't have a couple of years ago. So they're producing it themselves. They're even exporting somewhat. I went to a plastic factory as well. I went to a factory and a couple of factories in Agua. So I was very impressed with what I saw. So they are starting to rebuild, and they are making allies. Like I met a number of Iranians at the hotel who were observers as well. They spoke very good English. There's people from all over the world. There's people from every North African country, for example, except Morocco. And the only reason why there wasn't anybody from Morocco is because the Venezuelan government supports the Western Sahara resistors who are resisting their Moroccan occupiers. But every other country from Northern Africa was there: Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Libya. I met a Libyan comrade who was very close to Gaddafi. So people from all over the world. And what inspires them, despite the restrictions of COVID, to travel all the way to Venezuela? It's hard to get to Venezuela from many parts of the world, because they want to see the democratic system there. And mind you, there was observers that were not invited by the United Socialist Party, like I was. I'm literally the only resident of the state of Florida who was invited by the United Socialist Party. There were people invited by the CNE, which is an independent organ. There was people invited by opposition parties, and even the people invited by the opposition parties had approved those elections. So a lot of times the opposition themselves in Venezuela don't recognize when they're defeated. But here's another thing: when everybody talks about dictatorship, Chavez's hometown is Barinas. And Barinas had a revote. The CNE said they had to do a revote. They had to get a new candidate for the Chavista, a new candidate for the opposition parties. And, Acción Democrática, the Democratic Action Party, which is a center-right party, they ended up winning. And this is the first time since 1998 that Barinas has not been under Chavista control. Literally, the former governor was the brother of Hugo Chavez. So if this is a dictatorship, why are they going to give up the hometown of the founder of their party, of Hugo Chavez?
Another thing that I found interesting about Venezuela, and it was even when it was in deep poverty, they were building houses to give away to the poor. When I asked them, I said, "Oh, well, what about electricity?" They said, no, they don't pay for electricity. That's a human right. They get the houses. They have a CLEP program, I believe it is, where they give free food to the poor, that they have a lot of services. Even when the U.S. sanctions had them down to nothing, the government was still providing services for the poor. And I understand that's improving now that they've got more oil money come in. Can you talk to us about those kind of programs?
Yeah, one of the founder of the CLAP program is Ambassador Alex Saab.
Yes.
And he has been kidnapped and tortured, just like Assange was. He was captured during the Trump regime in June 2020 when he was in Cape Verde Island on the way to a humanitarian diplomatic mission with Iran. He's been a diplomat since 2018. And he was held. He was physically and psychologically tortured. That's according to the UN and the African Union. They investigated, and so he was held for over a year, and then he was extradited to Miami. I've gone to 2 of his hearings already. I've driven down there. I live in northern Florida. And so, Alex Saab, this is a complete violation. Unlike the ICC, right? We in the United States are one of the few countries that has not signed on to the ICC, but we have signed on to the Vienna Convention. And you remember when you interviewed me in 2020, that in 2019, I was one of the protectors or defenders of the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. There was a complete violation of the Vienna Convention as well when they illegally raided that embassy and arrested 4 comrades of ours, including the late Kevin Zeese, who was a great friend of mine. And so, I wrote a book about this back in early 2021 called Embassy Protectors, in case you want to check it out. The foreword was written by Alex Zeese. This was after his father passed away, Kevin Zeese. But back then we were saying, hey, look, they violated the Vienna Convention. What are they going to do next? Well, we know what they did next. They captured a diplomat, an ambassador, doing his job on false charges. 7 of the 8 charges were dropped. Only the lesser charge remains, but they're trying to hold him to have leverage over Maduro. And then you said it the other day, right? The tin cup. Yeah. Here we have Biden, right, going and begging now the Venezuelans to release the American criminals they have there, and they did release a couple of them, and also to start buying their oil. Maduro said what any head of state would say: bring me back my ambassador. Right. They're still holding him in South Florida. So hopefully he's out by April, because in April they're going to determine his diplomatic status. But He wasn't even traveling to the United States. This is unprecedented that we could kidnap. That's what it is kidnapping a diplomat in a third country and bring them here because we don't like their politics, because they're defying U.S. sanctions, unilateral sanctions that the UN says is illegal. Come on.
So talk about the programs. I know Alex Saab was one of the things he was doing was helping to get food to Venezuela around the sanctions. He was actually helping to feed people, and the U.S., now claiming to be for human rights, is actually working to stop from getting the people of Venezuela, food, for God's sake. But how's things going as far as the programs for the poor? Maybe you can, help.
That's just what I want to insist upon as well, Garland, that this program continues. And who established the route? Who uses business and diplomatic connections in the Middle East to establish this CLAP program that is saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan people and bringing that food despite the U.S. sanctions? Alex Saab did that. And it's still going on despite the fact that they've grabbed him. So that's a beautiful thing. And I met his wife when I was down there, Camila Fabri. Mm-hmm. They have children together. It's tragic what's going on.
I understand he has cancer also, and he's not being treated for
They denied his cancer medication. He's in remission, last I heard, but it's quite possible that cancer could return because he's been denied his cancer medication. He had stomach cancer. So yeah, and he went through physical, like he lost teeth. The UN determined this. He went through physical torture.
Wow.
Assange was never physically tortured. He was psychological torture. It was terrible. But they actually proved in Cape Verde on U.S. orders that Alex Saab was tortured. They were trying to get dirt on Maduro, and he refused. And they're trying to say he's an informant. They're trying to discredit him like that. How is he going to be an informant if they're torturing him? And this is interesting, too. You might not know this, Garland. Back when Chavez died in 2013, they tried to claim that Maduro was a DEA agent informant against Cabello, who's another prominent Chavista. And of course, they saw through those lies. If you're going to believe that lie about Alex Saab, you might as well believe that there's still WMDs in Iraq.
Exactly. So when I went to Venezuela, at that time, they had just completed like 3.3 million free homes for the poor. And at that time, the CLEP program, weekly, they gave people a box of food for the poor. But because of U.S. sanctions, they had to go lower the amount. I understand that's back up. What kind of programs are provided? And I also got to see where they had built this. A lot of the poor people lived in the mountains, and they had built these like trolley cars that came out of the mountains into the city that poor people could use for free to go in to work or to go to the markets or things like that. Talk about some of the programs that are provided by the government.
Let me tell you here in Jacksonville, Florida, in the richest nation on earth, we don't have a trolley car in town. We have among the worst public transportation in the nation. You have to have a car to get around. And here we have a third world country under sanctions for years now, and they're able to build things like this for the poor and working class. So the poor and working class conditions have bettered these past 20 years because of the leadership of Chavez and Maduro and others. That's indisputable. And, these obstacles that they face, the Venezuelans are resourceful, resilient people. You see that when you go there and you learn how the left united there and got their act together and was able to take power. So that was one of the reasons why I went down there, not just to bring supplies and to defy the U.S. sanctions for humanitarian purposes and to tell the truth to my people upon returning home, but to learn how they unite down there.
Yes. And, I went to the other thing I found out, I realized when I went there, we went out to this small town, and that was called like a socialista village or something like that. Basically what it was a huge apartment complex. And I mean, like the size of a small town. Right. And it was about 4 or 5 stories high. And what I found out was the government had built all of these apartments and given them to people who were poor. And I asked people, well, how do you get a free house? And they said, well, they have to apply to the government, and then women with children get first dibs, etc. But here's what I saw when I talked to the people. I said, what do you think? I'm from the U.S. And these were like women, small women, and they shook their fists and they said, we will fight for our democracy. We are the daughters of Chavez, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought to myself,
and Boulevard too. I went to see where Boulevard's buried, the great liberator.
Yes. And here's what I realized: the U.S. cannot overthrow Venezuela. The U.S. could never overthrow and hold Venezuela. Every last Venezuelan would fight. Every little woman and child in that country would fight the U.S.
Well, Garland, they have a people's militia. And not only that, when they sent the U.S. mercenaries from the Colombian border in, the militia fishermen captured them It wasn't even the regular forces that captured them. They thought they were going to come in as liberators, and they said, "What are you doing invading our country?" And within minutes of them crossing the river, they were captured by the fishermen there.
You know, I feel like this. One of the issues, you know, having friends that spend a lot of time in Nicaragua, having spent time in Venezuela. One of the things is the U.S. doesn't like that model. The U.S. doesn't want Americans to see that a country can provide free homes for the poor, that a country can say, if you don't have food, we'll give you food, that a country can say, we will allow the people, a lot of people don't know this, the Constitution in Venezuela, they let the people in small groups around the country write their own constitution and then put it together. The people were controlled. I think that America, the leaders of the owners of the United States, the oligarchs that run this place, don't want Americans to see that model and say, well, maybe we should write our own constitution and put it together as people. We should write the rules. Maybe we should choose our people. Maybe our poor people here that are on the street or barely eating, maybe the government should give them food and a place to stay. I think it's not that the U.S. sees that Venezuela or Nicaragua or the countries that are doing this are wrong. It's they don't want their people to see that model, Alex.
Absolutely. And also, it's important to stress there are two reasons why Angela Merkel, who was elected 5 times, is never called dictator like Chavez or Maduro. Number one, she's white. And number two, she doesn't have any oil. She's actually, well, Germany's reliant on Russian oil. So those are the two reasons why when a public referendum, where the public decided that their president could be elected multiple times, that ended up happening. Who's known as one of our greatest presidents, FDR, he was elected 4 times. They changed it after that. He died in office during a war. But why do we have to impose our model of democracy on others? And, I was part of Canova's campaign. Right. I saw, how they rigged things from the inside. Who are we to judge when we have things like that happening in our battleground state here in Florida?
Yes, you certainly. Well, we're just about out of time, but I certainly appreciate you coming on. Alex Suarez, where can people find you and find out about your stuff online?
Yeah, on Twitter, they can look me up, Al Suarez, and the handle says Alex Suarez as well. And building a following there, and have my show every Tuesday now that I'm co-hosting. So yeah, it's great to be back in touch with you.
Great, I have to get you back on some of my radio shows sometime soon.
I'd love to.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot, Alex. Talk to you soon. All right, that was Alex Suarez. Well, thanks a lot. That was an hour. Good guest again, and I really enjoy the Saturday mornings with my friends here. We had Regis Tremblay once again, Dan Lazare again. We got Alex Suarez. Caleb Maupin's out of town, but Caleb says he'll be back next week. So we're gonna have another great show, another great chat, and with you. So let me see what we got here. We got Tangled Up in Blah says, wonderful guest today. A dingo ate me baby says, Alexander's a true principled conservative and not a neoliberal neocon. I can respect that. Well, here's the thing about it. Let me say this about Alexander Mercouris. Alexander Mercouris is kind of a moderate / conservative in the truest sense. Because in the U.S., these neocons and neoliberal neocons call themselves conservatives, but they have no conservative principles. They just go along with whatever the billionaires, oligarchs want. And then we have a bunch of people who call themselves left, but they've got no principles, and whatever the Democratic Party tells them, they'll do. So we got a bunch of brainwashed cults here. I don't have to agree with you on everything. I agree with Alex on a lot of stuff. Some of the economic stuff I may disagree with on, but he's a principled man. He stands up for the principles that he believes in, principles of freedom, principles of press freedom. He does a lot of work for Julian Assange. I met him in London and his wife, wonderful people, just wonderful people. And it was at an Assange event. So Alexander Mercouris, a guy that I really think the world of, a friend of mine. And again, and this is what I think people are learning. This is what people are learning. We don't have to agree on everything. But if we have some common principles that we believe that we have a right to some level of freedom as individuals from complete and total government intervention in every form of our lives, that we have a right, and here's a term that you never hear anymore. My little rant at the end. And I think that's what the people here that you all believe in, what I believe in, what Alexander McCourse believes in. Gonzalo Lira, he's more conservative than me on a lot of issues. But here's a word I want you to think about that you don't hear: stability. Economic stability, political stability, military stability, diplomatic stability. What the U.S. and the NATO and these colonialist and empire toadies believe in is instability and chaos. They create instability and chaos in the Middle East, in South America, in Africa. They're overthrowing countries. They're creating instability, and then there's refugees. They're creating wars. They've got enemies and adversaries they're always attacking. They create chaos and instability. And in a nutshell, you may be a conservative, you may be a progressive, you may be a socialist, you may be a moderate. Okay, all of those things. I have friends that are everything from communists to far right wingers, right? The stone cold libertarians. But there is a commonality. They have a certain level of principles, and they have concern for the average working person, for the working person, for the middle class, for the working poor, and for the poor. There is some concern for stability, for creating an environment that's stable and allowing people to have a life where they're not drowning in propaganda, where they're not their mind, soul, and body is not completely controlled by the government, where there's a level of freedom where we don't have unreasonable government intervention. I'm not an anti-government libertarian. I believe, as in Venezuela, that if you got homeless people, there's nothing wrong with the government doing something to house homeless people, and that there is a certain responsibility of the government. I mean, I go to DC every day and there's homeless people, and one thing you see, a lot of mental illness. I see them every day, a lot of severe mental illness. People talking to themselves, wandering around, completely confused. And I think a government has some responsibility to say, these are people that oftentimes can't. I mean, you're wandering down the street, walking to yourself, looking behind yourself, saying, one guy always looks behind himself and tells somebody to stop following me, stop chasing me, and there's nobody behind him. The government has a responsibility to our society, to people who can't handle life because of mental illness, no fault of their own. So I think there are those of us who are principled that want a stable country, free from war, free from I believe in a certain level of government providing for people of a reasonable social safety net, but I don't think the government should tell me what I got to eat, drink, and think, and then fill the airways full of lies. So what we're seeing, I think now, the worst case scenario for the people in charge is when the working class and the working poor and the poor come together and say, we may not agree on some things, but we have a commonality. And that is, we want a fair society. We want transparency from the government. We want stability, not chaos, and diplomacy between countries to resolve our issues, and not violence and war and threats. I think that's why a lot of us come together. And then, of course, the mainstream just tells us who we've got to hate. Okay, and that ain't right. Let's see who else we got. U.S. government more concerned about illegal aliens. They don't, when it benefits them. When it benefits them, all of them, they'll use the issue of immigration cynically as it benefits the powerful people. When they want cheaper labor, they'll do everything they can to bring it in to get it if they can get cheaper labor than us. And look, it doesn't matter about immigration, because what happened with China? What was the rise of China? The rise of China was the oligarchs in the US and the oligarchs in NATO saying, you know what? We could get cheaper labor in another country. And here's China. They're opening up their labor market. Let's fire all the Americans and let's move all to China and get the cheaper labor. So, that, and now they're mad at China. Well, they created the rise of China out of their greed. And China had a right to, hey, look, you're offering China jobs. They should have took it. You're offering technology. They should have took it. Now they're building their own, which they're acting in an enterprising nature. More power to them. And now they're mad because they are afraid they'll lose power. We want stability. We want some level of freedom and we can discuss how much, and we want transparency and honesty. One thing, and about Alex McCorris, about Gonzalo Lira, about Garland Nixon, about Tom Luongo, people who may not agree, Alex Christoforis, people who may not agree on everything, who may strongly disagree on some policies. But if we tell you something, that we honestly believe that. We're going to be transparent with you. That's all you can ask. You don't have to ask me to agree. You just have to ask for, this is what Garland really believes. If somebody says Garland's feeding you Russian propaganda, all that really means is that what Garland says may align with what the Russians say or believe. It doesn't matter to Garland. Garland's going to tell you, I don't care who it aligns with or it doesn't align with. You can call it Venezuelan propaganda. You can call it anything you want. Doesn't matter to me. And I think that's what I'm starting to see. And I'll end up by saying this. I had talked to a friend of mine a while back, and we were talking about, is it futile? Is it futile for those of us who are in alternative media to continue on? Are we wasting our time? And at the beginning of the Ukrainian military crisis, I said, I believe we can break through. I believe that we're getting 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week propaganda, but I believe that somehow, if we keep talking, that it'll break through. And I believe it is. And it's not that it's breaking through pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, pro-any U.S., pro-anything. What's breaking through is reality. Because people like us say, let's look at reality. What I talked about with Dan Lazare today was what? How the machinations of these gigantic political machines in the EU and the US and Russia are translating to the everyday person. How I talked to Regis Tremblay, all these things that are happening. What's happening with the everyday person in Crimea? Is there food on your shelves? Are you able to eat? What's going to happen when the people in Europe and America wake up and say, we can't afford to buy gas, we can't afford, inflation's going through the roof, the dollar's crashing, we're in a recession? That's the average everyday person suffering. The average people who have to feed their families. That's where my concern goes to. It's not, are you a libertarian, a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative? Although if you're a Republican or a Democrat, I think that you need to wake up. But you got a right to be that. Well, I mean, we can disagree, and that's okay. All right, what's that say? Or get on his show, just saying. All right, well, thanks. Duck of Death, that's funny. Jackson Hinkle, I do like Jackson Hinkle. He's a very interesting guy. At any rate, thanks a lot. It is Saturday morning, so I'm going to get up and get going. It's the beginning of the month, so Garland's going to sit down and maybe look across my bills online and see what I need to plink and plunk with. I'm going to maybe clean up a little bit. Look, I would like to end by asking this. I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Garland Nixon. I would ask those who can. I'm actually working to build a not just a media outlet, but a media kind of a network. Not just a garlandnixon.com, come watch me, but something where I can get a number of shows on from different people. That's what I'm working to build. And my goal, believe it or not, is $100,000. May not get it overnight, but I believe I'm going to get it. I've got a couple of different plans and a couple of different ways to truly build a media outlet so we can have not just a bunch of alternative shows here and there, but like an outlet, like a CBS, NBC, whatever, where we have our own website and where you can go to that show and there's 8 or 10 different shows on the website, and you can go to this network, and here's a network with a bunch of different shows, some of them showing live, some of them you can archived, etc. And so that we can maybe even get everything out. And ideally, I want everything out of YouTube, because YouTube is too much self-censorship. Even me, all of us, where they win is once we know what we can or can't say, we self-censorship. And I think we need to get everybody out of YouTube that we can, at least on the network that I want to build. So Garland Nixon on Patreon, whatever you can help us with, $1 a month, $5 a month, 10, 20, 100, whatever you can afford, I would certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot to all of my friends, especially the one and only Chicken Patty. Patty and I are tight. Peace. I am out.